All right, we do. This is a reporter for CNN. I forget her name. But she's very upset because apparently, reportedly, she was disinvited. Caitlin Collins. She was disinvited from a presser involving the president of the European Union and the president because earlier in the day, when the president was apparently meeting with this gentleman, she was asking about Michael Cohen. She was asking about Russia. And so, of course, the media will circle the wagons because in the end, that's who they are. But the fact of the matter is, the inappropriateness of barking out questions and to constantly use the format of a press event, a presidential press event, to advance an ideological agenda on Russia and Michael Cohen when the president's sitting there with the president of the EU and he's trying to do business and talk about that, the press needs to look in the mirror. This does not serve the American people. It serves the press, which has an ideological agenda. I think this is quite serious. It's a serious point. The press will say this is attack on freedom of the press. No, it's not. The press are attacking freedom of the press. Nobody's saying you shouldn't be an intrepid reporter, you shouldn't be an investigative reporter, you shouldn't dig, and so forth and so on. But there's an appropriateness to these presidential press conferences. Here's what she had to say. Mr. Producer, go ahead.
Yeah, that's right, Wolf. So I was blocked from attending an open press event here at the White House because the White House did not like the questions I posed to President Trump earlier in the day.
It's not a matter of not liking the questions, which suggests that they don't like hard questions. It was the inappropriateness of you disrupting the event by asking questions that have absolutely nothing to do with the event. Go ahead.
Earlier in the day during an event in the Oval Office with the president of the European Commission. So to walk you through exactly what was going on, I was representing the rest of the television networks during this spray, which is what we refer to it here at the White House, in the Oval Office. We were brought in for the top of the meeting between the president and the president of the European Commission. Both men delivered remarks, and then I and several other reporters started asking President Trump questions. This is a normal occurrence, and it is often our only chance to ask President Trump questions that day, and he often responds to us, Wolf. So to give you a sense of the questions that the White House
now
did
stop.
not like...
Listen to the background, where they're rude and so forth. She didn't want to ask a question that's on topic. Could have asked a lot of tough questions about trade, taxes. She didn't want to ask those questions. NATO, with the head of the European Union, Cohen, and the so-called Helsinki, Russia stuff still. These are presidential press events. They're not CNN press events. They're not MSNBC press events. Nobody is a bigger advocate of the Constitution than I am, and that includes the Bill of Rights. It's the left that attacks the Bill of Rights and free speech all the time, whether it's our college campuses, whether it's talk radio, whether it's Fox News, whatever it is. Go ahead.
Trump. So, Wolf, the questions I asked, in case you couldn't hear them, was if the president was upset and felt that Michael Cohen, his former attorney, had betrayed him by allowing the release.
So he's there with the president of the European Commission, and she's asking about Michael Cohen and the tape, which was leaked to CNN, Cuomo. And he's trying to talk about trade, something that is crucially important to the American people, to farmers, to auto workers, to steel workers, to all of us. And she's pushing the CNN agenda. Go ahead.
The release of that audio recording. We also asked if he was worried about what Michael Cohen would say to prosecutors. As you know, the president was tweeting about that recording with Michael Cohen.
But you see, this is what they do. They disrupt all of his press events with this stuff. So the president also has an obligation to get a message across to the American people about what he's doing and what he wants to do when it comes to food on the table, the cost of products, jobs. That's what trade and commerce is all about. Instead, she wants to talk about Michael Cohen, the tape, whether or not he's concerned that Cohen's going to talk to federal prosecutors. What does this have to do with anything? And what does she think he's going to say? In other words, the question, we already know the answers to the questions. So the questions and the way they pose it are intended to be the headlines. That's what's different about the press today than 20, 30, 40 years ago. It's not that they're better. They're performers. Go ahead.
Owen just this morning on his Twitter account. And then I also asked the president if why Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, had not accepted his invitation to the White House yet. That was before the White House announced that they were going to postpone that meeting until next year. Now, Wolf, after that event was over, the president did not answer questions. He said, thank you. We left the Oval Office. And then later I was called into the office of Bill Shine, the president's latest hire, who is his right-hand man for communications. It was him and the press secretary, Sarah Sanders, who told me that I would not be invited to an open press event here in the
Why do you think? It's not, look, it's not anti-press because there's press there from everywhere. It's that CNN, obviously, orders from on high, is disrupting these press events. You never saw this with Barack Obama. You never saw this with Barack Obama, ever. So a president is responsive to the people, answers questions, many that he doesn't like. But if you have a network that has as its purpose an ideological agenda and to disrupt what the president is saying with the head of the EU next to him, what do you think he's supposed to do? Again, I'm not in favor of dictatorship. I'm not in favor of undermining the freedom of the press. This has nothing to do with that. We need to unravel this, what's taking place here. Go ahead.
Garden moments later at the White House because they thought the questions that I posed to President Trump were inappropriate for that venue. I told them that is often our only chance to ask the president questions.
So what? It was inappropriate for the venue. And they're exactly right. They're exactly right. You were out of control. And I don't care if Fox they have announced they stand behind CNN. I don't care about this superficial collegiality that takes place among these various media outlets. Because they're afraid next time there's a Democrat president, maybe they'll push Fox out of here. The problem is, the American people are not served by this. By a Jim Acosta or somebody like this. They know what they're doing. They're looking for a quick hit. They're looking for ratings. They're not. What do they want him to say, Trump? Yes, I'm worried about Cohen talking to federal authorities. Yes, he's got all kinds of dirt on me. Go ahead.
Asked the president questions. Those questions were questions any reporter would have asked, and I was there to represent all of the networks and therefore ask about the questions of the day.
They're obviously not questions every reporter would have asked because every other reporter wasn't said, or told rather, not to attend the next event. They wrap themselves in this stuff all the time. But watch, the reporters will in fact circle the wagons. When we return, I will give you a little bit of a history lesson about presidential press conferences. You know, they didn't always exist. I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.
Our next guest on Life, Liberty, and Levin on Sunday on the Fox News Channel will be retired Lieutenant Colonel Alan West. See what he's up to, what he thinks about events that are taking place. He's really a scholar, too. He reads an enormous amount. He reads books about philosophy and so forth. He reads my books. So he's a fascinating man, and I wanted to catch up with him, and I think you're going to really enjoy the interview. I haven't done it yet, but I think you're going to really enjoy it. I think I'm going to. All right, presidential press conference. They started in a way with Woodrow Wilson. He had the first one. But it wasn't the kind of event you see today. Not a freewheeling press conference. And you can look at the whitehousehistory.org site for what I'm about to tell you. And they say that President Kennedy stands midway between Presidents Wilson and Obama, with 7 presidents before him and 9 following him. Of course, there's now 10. In the period preceding the Kennedy presidency, the rules governing press conferences favored the president. The sessions were off-the-record events from Woodrow Wilson through Harry Truman. If the president said something he believed unwise, he could alter the quote, President Truman, for example, was able to back away from a comment about Senator Joseph McCarthy that he made in March 30, 1950 at a press conference. Truman said, "I think the greatest asset that the Kremlin has is Senator McCarthy." Well, one of the reporters commented that the president's observation would, quote, hit page 1 tomorrow. Truman realized he'd better soften the statement. He worked with the reporters and allowed the following as a direct quotation, quote, "The greatest asset that the Kremlin has is the partisan attempt in the Senate to sabotage the bipartisan foreign policy of the United States." When the rules governing press conferences were off the record, chief executives held them from once or twice a week. In fact, Calvin Coolidge, who held the most press conferences for the number of years he was in office, had 521 sessions, or an average of 93 a year. But once they went on the record in the Eisenhower administration, the numbers dropped drastically. Now they had to take time preparing for these sessions and then be careful what they said when answering questions. Eisenhower and Kennedy, respectively, had 24 and 23 press conferences a year. The first televised press conference was held January 19, 1955. President Eisenhower came into the Indian Treaty Room, a room with poor acoustics and limited seating, and announced the experiment that they were about to be part of. In fact, television made an enormous difference in the significance of press conferences and presidential publicity. It has been a disturbing influence. Presidents have made mistakes, though only rarely, but the sessions have been an enormous resource for presidents as they seek to explain policy and themselves to the public. And it goes on. The press conference is not for the press. The press conference is for the American people. The press today claim to be many things, including our representatives. The press are not our representatives, because for the most part they take sides. For the most part we know what side they take. The purpose of a press conference isn't to give a so-called reporter for a so-called news outlet the opportunity to disrupt it. To disrupt it. I can remember when that reporter for the Daily Caller, I believe his name was Neil Monroe, all the press, the gaggle was there, Obama was there, nobody ever interrupted Obama, nobody ever raised their voice, and he did, he interrupted and he raised his voice. Obama spoke down to him, and the other press in the room told him to be quiet. I don't remember the press circling the rag around him. The purpose of a press conference is not for the press. In fact, the purpose of a free press is not for the press. It's for the citizenry to know what their government is doing, among other things. We cannot know what our government is doing when you have individuals like Jim Acosta or others at CNN and perhaps others at other news agencies who are abusing the process to make points, to push an agenda, to embarrass a president. If that's the point, day in and day out and day in and day out. The president didn't willy-nilly, through his surrogates, say that this CNN reporter shouldn't appear at the next event. She was talking about Michael Cohen, the tape, whether or not the president's worried about him working with the feds when he's sitting there with the president of the European Union Commission. But we don't have any other opportunity. We don't have any other opportunity. Sure you do. I'll be right back.